Hi, Ari. So we're going to start with chapter 2. We just finished chapter 1 where Enola had her 14th birthday and her mom missed it. We don't know where her mom is. She's starting to get a little bit worried about her, and she even sent a letter to her two older brothers asking them how she should go on. So we're going to start chapter 2. There are a couple of words you might need help with in this chapter. Vicarage, that's a place where a priest lives, and a vicar is another word for priest or holy person. Fishmonger, they sell fish. Bloomers, it's a type of underwear that women would wear under their big fancy dresses, because back in this time, women were not really supposed to wear pants, but Enola does anyway. And then there are a couple famous names mentioned. Malthus, he was an economist, and an economist is someone who teaches about money and how money works in the world. And Darwin was a famous geologist and biologist. Okay, ready? Chapter 2. Chapter the 2nd. After sipping the tea urged upon me by Mrs. Lane, I changed to dry knickerbockers and started off to deliver my notes to the village. "But the rain, the wet, Dick will take them," Mrs. Lane offered, wringing her hands in her apron again. Her grown son, she meant, who did odd jobs around the estate, while Reginald, the somewhat more intelligent collie dog, supervised him. Rather than tell Mrs. Lane I did not trust Dick with this important errand, I said, "I shall make some inquiries while I'm there. I will take the bicycle." This was not some old high-wheeled bone shaker, but an up-to-date dwarf bicycle with pneumatic tires. Perfectly safe. Pedaling through the drizzle, I stopped for a moment at the lodge. Ferndale is small for a hall, really only a stone house with its chest puffed out, so to speak. But it needs must have a drive, a gate, and therefore a lodge. "Cooper," I asked the lodge-keeper, "would you open the gate for me? And, by the way, do you happen to recall opening it for my mother yesterday?" To which, not quite masking his astonishment at such a question, he replied in the negative. At no time had Lady Eudora Holmes passed this way. After he had led me out, I pedalled the short distance to Kinneford village. At the post office I sent my telegrams. Then I left off my note at the constabulary and spoke with the officer before I began my rounds. I stopped at the vicarage, the greengrocer's, the bakery, the confectionery, the butcher shop, the fishmonger's, and so forth, inquiring after my mother as discreetly as I could. No one had seen her. The vicar's wife, among others, raised her eyebrows at me. I supposed it was because of my knickerbockers. For public cycling, you see, I should have been wearing rationals, bloomers covered by a waterproof skirt, or, indeed, any kind of skirt long enough to conceal my ankles. I knew my mother was criticized for failing properly to drape vulgar surfaces, such as coal scuttles, the back of her piano, and me. Shocking child that I was. I never questioned my disgrace, for to do so would have been to broach matters of which a nice girl must remain ignorant. I had observed, however, that most married women disappeared into the house every year or two, emerging several months later with a new child, to the number of perhaps a dozen, until they either ceased or expired. My mother, by comparison, had produced only my two much older brothers. Somehow this prior restraint made my late arrival all the more shameful for a gentleman rationalist logician and his well-bred artistic wife. The eyebrow-raisers bent their heads together and whispered as I pedalled around Kinneford again, this time inquiring at the inn, the smithy, the tobacconist's, and the public-house, places where nice females seldom set foot. I learned nothing, and despite my best smiles and the by-the-way manner, I could almost hear a crescendo of excited gossip, conjecture, and rumor rising behind me as I returned to Ferndale Hall in an unhappy state of mind. No one has seen her, I answered Mrs. Lane's mute, questioning glance, or has any idea where she might be. Again waving aside her offers of luncheon, although now it was nearly tea time, I trudged upstairs to my mother's suite of rooms and stood outside the hallway door, considering. Mum kept her door locked. Mum kept her door locked, to spare Mrs. Lane the trouble, supposedly, for Lane and Mrs. Lane were the only house servants. Mum cleaned her rooms herself. She hardly ever allowed anyone to enter, but under the circumstances, I decided to go ahead. Laying my hand upon the doorknob, I fully expected I would have to hunt up Lane to get the key. But the knob turned in my grasp. The door opened, and I knew in that moment, if I had not known before, that everything had changed. Looking about me in the hush of my mother's sitting room, I felt rather more worshipful than if I were in a chapel. I had read Father's logic books, you see, and Malthus and Darwin. Like my parents, I held rational and scientific views. But being in Mum's room made me feel as if I wanted to believe in something. The soul, perhaps, or the spirit. Mum had made this room a sanctuary of the artistic spirit. Panels of Japanese lotus patterned silk dressed the windows, drawn back to let in the light upon slender furnishings of maple wood carved to resemble bamboo, very different from the hulking dark mahogany in the parlor. Down there all the wood was varnished. Heavy serge draped the windows, and from the walls stared grim oil portraits of ancestors. But here, in my mother's domain, the wood had been painted white, and on pastel walls hung 100 delicate watercolors. Mum's airy, lovingly detailed renditions of flowers, each picture no larger than a sheet of writing paper, lightly framed. For a moment, I felt as if Mum were here in this room, had been here all the time. Would that it were so. Softly, as if I might disturb her, I tiptoed into the next room, her studio, a plain room with a bare window for the sake of light, and a bare oak floor for the sake of cleaning. Scanning the easel, the tilted art table, the shelves of paper and supplies, I caught sight of a wooden box and frowned. Wherever Mom had gone, she had not taken her watercolor kit with her. But I had assumed. How very stupid of me. I should have looked here first. She had not gone out to study flowers at all. She had gone somewhere. Why, I simply did not know. And how had I ever thought I could find her myself? I was stupid. My steps heavy now, I walked through the next door, into Mom's bedroom, and halted, astonished for several reasons. First and foremost, the state of Mum's shining modern brass bed, unmade. Every morning of my life, Mum had seen to it that I made my bed and tidied my room immediately after breakfast. Surely she would not leave her own bed with linens thrown back and pillows askew, an eider-down comforter sliding onto the Persian carpet. Moreover, her clothes had not been properly put away. Her brown tweed walking suit had been most carelessly thrown over the top of the standing mirror. But if not her customary walking outfit, with its skirt that could be drawn up by the strings so that only petticoats need get wet or soiled, you let down at a moment's notice should a mail appear on the horizon, if not this very practical up-to-date garment for the country, then what had she worn? Parting the velvet drapes to admit light from the windows, I threw open the wardrobe doors, then stood trying to make sense of the jumble of clothing inside. Wool, worsted, muslin, and cotton, but also damask, silk, tulle, and velvet. Mum was, you see, very much a free thinker, a woman of character, a proponent of female suffrage and dress reform, including the soft, loose aesthetic gowns advocated by Ruskin, but also, whether she liked it or not, she was a squire's widow, with certain obligations. So there were walking costumes and rationals, but also formal visiting dresses, a low-necked dinner dress, an opera cloak, and a ball gown, the same rusty purple one Mum had worn for years. She did not care whether she was in fashion, nor did she throw anything away. There were the black widow's weeds she had worn for a year after my father's demise. There was a bronze-green habit left over from her fox-hunting days. There was her grey-caped pavement-sweeping suit for city wear. There were fur mantles, quilted satin jackets, paisley skirts, blouses upon blouses. I could not make out what garments might be missing from that bewilderment of mauve, maroon, grey, blue, lavender, olive, black, amber, and brown. Closing the wardrobe doors, I stood puzzled, looking about me. The entire room was in disarray. The two halves or stays of a corset, along with other unmentionables, lay in plain sight on the marble-topped washstand, and upon the dresser sat a peculiar object, like a cushion, but all of a poof, made of coils and clouds of white horsehair. I lifted this odd thing, rather springy to the touch, and making no sense of it, I carried it along with me on my way out of my mother's room. In the downstairs hallway I encountered Lane polishing the woodwork. Showing him my find, I asked him, "Lane, what is this?" As a butler, he did his very best to remain expressionless, but he stammered slightly as he replied, "That is, a dress improver, Miss Enola." Dress improver? But not for the front, surely. Therefore it must be for the rear. Oh. I held in my hands, in a public room of the hall, in the presence of a male, the unwhisperable that hid inside a gentlewoman's bustle, supporting its folds and draperies. "I beg your pardon," I exclaimed, feeling the heat of a blush rise in my face. I had no idea. Never having worn a bustle, I had not seen such an item before. 1,000 apologies. But an urgent thought conquered my embarrassment. "Lane," I asked, "in what manner was my mother dressed when she left the house yesterday morning?"
"It's difficult to recall, miss."
"Was she carrying any sort of baggage or parcel?"
"No, indeed, miss."
"Not even a reticule, a handbag?"
"No, miss."
Mother seldom carried anything of the sort.
"I think I would have noticed if she were."
"Was she by chance wearing a costume with the word bustle would be indelicate when speaking to a male. With a train? With tournier?" Very unlikely her, if so. But with memory dawning in his eyes, Lane nodded.
"I cannot bring to mind her exact apparel, Miss Enola, but I do recall she wore her turkey-back jacket."
"The kind of jacket that would accommodate a bustle."
"And her high-crowned grey hat."
I knew that hat. Meant to be military in appearance, resembling an upside-down flower-pot. It was sometimes, by the vulgar, called 3 stories and a basement.
"And she carried her walking umbrella."
A long black implement meant to be used like a cane, as sturdy as a gentleman's stick. How odd that my mother should go out with a mannish umbrella, a mannish hat, yet swishing that most flirtatious feminine tail. A bustle. The plot thickens. Where could her mother have gone? I will be back with Chapter 3 real soon.